One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. So I want to start this episode today with a little side note, right? Because we're just going to pretend like the conversation has never ended, right? That's how I think of this podcast, is just a continuous conversation. But somebody asked me the other day, they said, how do you know what to say when you start your podcast episodes? And this got me thinking, and it actually tripped me up when I went to record the beginning, the introduction of this episode, because I thought, well, how do I start my podcast episodes? And then it came to me, like I just said, I basically pretend like this is an ongoing conversation, right? So if you've been listening for a while, then we're just picking up where we left off, right? Like, let's imagine that we had like a brief intermission, right? Like we're sitting down to have a cup of coffee, and then one of us gets up, we go on about our lives for a few days, and then here we are again. We're sitting here chatting about something to do with podcasting. So there you go. For those of you who are wondering, like, how does Crystal, what does she think about? What are the deep thoughts and just inner workings that go on in her brain to decide how to start a podcast episode? It's just a conversation. That's really, I just think of it like I am picturing you while I'm sitting here with this microphone in front of me. I am just imagining I'm speaking to just you. It's just you and I here, right? Like it's me behind the microphone and it's you in your earbuds or wherever you're listening to this. And I just want to throw that out there. Like there's really no rocket science for me and the way that I teach these things. It's just kind of, this is how it works for me. And I hope that that's how it will work for you as well. But that's just a little quick side note. That's how I wanted to start this episode. But today we have a question from the community that I'm really excited to dive into. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, Think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? All right, so like I said in the beginning, we're doing a question from the community, and I love doing these. So if you want to use this idea, I highly recommend it because it's honestly where I get so much of my content, but I will go into our Profit Podcast Facebook community or one of the other, y'all, I'm a part of way too many Facebook groups. I need to go in and do like some spring cleaning on the number of groups that I'm involved in. I don't even want to share it with you because I don't even know. I don't even know how many groups I'm a part of that I actually participate in, probably about 5. But I think I'm a member of like 40 groups and it's just clutter. I need to declutter the Facebook groups. But anyway, the reason why I bring that up is because I want you to become an active member of your own Facebook groups and other places where your ideal listener is hanging out, because this is where you can find some very, very valuable content. So that is where today's question comes from. It's from another podcasting community. And the question was, when do you actually release your quote unquote blog post that goes along with each podcast episode? Do you put it out the same day or do you publish this later? I thought this was a fantastic question. It's very valid, and it's one that I've actually seen a lot of my students and clients and members of my community ask, but I don't really know why I hadn't addressed this before. I think it was just because the way that I teach, it just kind of happens the way that everything unfolds, like in the process. Like it's one of the processes, like the check boxes on my to-do list whenever I publish a podcast episode. So I never really thought of doing it any other way until I saw this question and the way that this person asked it. I thought, oh, this is something that we need to bring up. And I think it comes up so often because people are confused about show notes. I recently did a YouTube video all about show notes, and I've done a podcast episode all about show notes and podcast descriptions and what they actually mean, how I define them, because my definition may be different from another podcasting coach's definition. So I'm going to link to those in the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 165. You will find everything that we're going to talk about here today, including that podcast episode and the YouTube video that I just recently did. But it's really important because whenever I talk about my show notes, those are basically a blog post, but that's not what I call them, because I think that people think of them as two separate things. When you say a podcast and a blog post, I imagine a podcast being something I'm going to sit down and listen to on my phone when I'm folding laundry, as opposed to a blog post or an article that I'm going to have to sit down and put my full focused attention. I can't do anything else, like I got to sit and read and actually pay attention, which some of you may be laughing, like, do you not have time to do that? No, I don't. I really don't. And honestly, I can't sit still for very long because I am either working or I'm doing something with the kids or I'm cleaning my house, I'm doing laundry. Y'all know what? I talk about laundry all the time. It's just, it's something. I want one of those robots, right? I'm imagining, and I can't think of her name, the robot from the Jetsons, right? What is her name? Oh my gosh, I blanking out totally, but I'm thinking about the Jetsons and, the robot, and she would just kind of be everywhere. I don't know if she was a butler or she was a maid or what she did, but I imagine her doing laundry, and I'm just like, I just need one of those in my house, just a robot that I can just throw it at it and say, here, will you please do all of this for me? Thank you so much. And then I don't have to worry about it anymore. So where were we? We were talking about laundry. I feel like I bring it up all the time, but this is a real thing. You guys, the struggle is real when it comes to laundry and how much I dislike it. So until I find the perfect solution, I'll probably continue to complain about it here on the podcast. But whatever, we're going to get back to show notes and blog posts and the difference and why you need them and why you don't need to do it this way and why you should do it that way. So I do have a few ways that you can do this depending on your goals and your style and the capacity to actually create these in the way that I'm going to suggest to you. So there's multiple options. Okay. It's not just one and done. You have to, like, it's my way or the highway. I am a total firm believer in do what works best for you and what you can handle. If you have a whole slew of people, right? You have a whole team of people behind you, then you have tons of options for how you can do this. But if it is just you and you are very limited already on your time and the capacity that you have to learn new technology and do a whole bunch of things, then keep it simple. Okay, that is my disclaimer. Like, there are many options here. It's not just choose one and that is the only one that you can go with, but there are different ways to do this. So, number one, okay, so we're going to go back to the original question was, do you release your blog and your episode on the same day? So this is door number one. Hang on, we just transported onto The Price is Right. Do you see Bob Barker? Hang on, we're going to go on another tangent real fast because people talk about The Price is Right and they talk about Drew Carey. I'm like, no. Bob Barker was the man, right? Like, he was the only one that could do Plinko the right way and say, come on down. Although I guess he didn't say come on down. It was his other guy in the booth or whatever. See, we're just going on lots of tangents today, but I'm just transporting you. We're doing a little time traveling. We're going all over the place, right? The Jetsons, The Price is Right, all the places today. But behind door number one, the first option is you can do what I do. You can release both the audio and the blog post, right? The quote unquote blog post on the same day.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants. Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
So I want you to choose this if you are referencing your show notes in your podcast episode. Because remember what I did just a second ago? I said, if you want to see this video and the other the other podcast episode I'm talking about, go see the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 165. If you're going to do that, if you actually want to send people to other resources on your website or just other places where you want them to go, then you need to do them on the same day. Absolutely. Because why would you reference something in your podcast episode, but it actually isn't coming out for another 2 more weeks? Or let's say you release on a Tuesday, but it's not going to be available on Friday. That doesn't make sense. You're not going to be seen as like a reliable source because you don't do what you say, right? So there are pros and cons to each of these. So the first one for this option right here, the pro is this is really good for SEO because if you are already, I've had lots of questions about SEO and how it really works and does it work and is it even worth the time? Yes, yes, and yes. SEO has been such a great thing that has helped my podcast and all the content that I've been creating, but it does take time. It's not something that you can just put in a few keywords on one podcast episode and then be known forever and always as that one specific reference for that one specific keyword. It's not how it works. Google is constantly changing. The search engines are getting smarter and other people just like you are putting out content as well. So it's like a constant competition to one up somebody and rank higher and higher within the search results. So that is one of the good things about having a blog post and an audio file is search engines like that. The second pro for releasing both the audio and the blog post on the same day is it looks really professional. It looks very legit. I've had many people comment and tell me I really like the way you do your show notes. It looks very professional, because you actually have an audio file at the top and then you go down and you can see exactly how I do this by going to this episode's show notes. But I have the audio file at the top and then it's formatted and then there's kind of a blurb on what we talk about here and just a little behind the scenes. You guys, all I do is I write very detailed outlines. I've talked about this before. I write very detailed outlines before I start recording. And then after we're done here today and I'm done recording and I go to do the show notes, I'm not just pulling these ideas out of thin air and writing a blog post. I have a very detailed outline in front of me while I'm recording. And then when I'm done here, I will take all of this. Plus, I'll go back and listen to this episode like after it's done and I'm in the editing phase, and I will add in a little bit extra to make it long enough to where the SEO is happy because I have a plugin on my WordPress website. It's called Yoast. I'll link to that, and I'll link to the previous podcast episode I did about SEO. And you can see more information about SEO. I'm not going to go down an SEO rabbit hole right now. And I've said SEO like 3 times. If you don't know what that means, it's search engine optimization. And that simply means that you're making Google happy and the other search engines happy because they will index your file, your blog post, and it's more likely to appear in search engines. But okay, so we went down a little SEO rabbit hole, but it makes your site, your show notes, your blog post, whatever you want to call them, they look professional and legitimate. So if I sit here and I say, go see the show notes, and someone goes to my website, they're like, oh, this looks really nice. It's formatted. It's well put together. It's not just a whole bunch of bullet points that don't make any sense thrown up on a web page. It looks very formatted. It looks very professional and legit. Now, we've gone over the pros. What are the cons to doing it this way? You guys, it takes a lot of time. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, I record and then it takes me 5 minutes and I slap up a blog post and it looks so professional. Nope. No. It takes me a while. And the reason why I create such detailed outlines is because I learned the hard way that I used to just have basically a sticky note that had 2 or 3 bullet points, and that's what I would record off of. I'd just kind of riff off of the bullet points that I had on this Post-it note. But when I sat down to create the show notes, it was like, oh my gosh, it was awful. It was because writing is not my strong suit. This is why I'm a podcaster, because when I sit down to write stuff, it normally does not flow out of me very easily. So I found that if I spent time really working on the outline first, then it would be easier for me to record, and that would make creating the show notes for the episode easier as well. So it is a time-consuming process. So whether it's spending more time up front planning or actually creating your show notes on your website, it is a time-consuming process. Especially, I publish 2 episodes a week. That's a lot of hours I'm spending planning or creating or uploading, working on my website, working in WordPress, getting everything situated the way that I want it to be. The other, and it's funny because I listed this as a con. It's not really a con as much of if this is not your personality type, then this is not going to work for you. But I said you must be organized. So like I said, it's not necessarily a con because that makes it sound like it's a negative. But if you are not an organized person, having show notes this way is not going to work out for you unless you have help. And this would be the first thing. If you are struggling and you're like, I really want to have a professional show notes, I want to look legit, I want to do all this, but I'm not organized, you need to hand that off to somebody else. You need to hand it off to a podcast manager, a virtual assistant, somebody else that is organized that can help you in this arena, because you're not just going to wake up one day and be organized, right? You know this about yourself. If you are constantly losing stuff, you lost your Google Doc and you're just like, I don't even know which one it was. It was on a Post-it note somewhere, but the podcast episode was good. I just have no idea what I would put in my show notes. Hand it off to somebody else. Okay. So that's option number one. That's door number one, is you can release both the audio and the blog post on the same day. And I say this one first because it is the hardest. We're doing like the hardest thing first, and then we're going to get easier. It's almost like I'm delivering the bad news up front and things get easier. If you are just getting started, don't worry. I do have some options for you. So door number two, right? Like Bob Barker, we got his little skinny microphone, right? That I'm like holding. I'm not doing that. I'm totally trying to improvise. What else? Like I'm in my Bob Barker suit with like my skinny microphone, and I have my note cards, and I say, actual retail price is, I'm just kidding. Oh my gosh, this is such a mess today. So door number two, release the audio earlier in the week, and then you can release the blog post later that week, or vice versa. So how would this actually work? So this would work if you wanted to release a podcast episode on Tuesday, and then on Thursday, you wanted to release a blog post totally separate that is related to what your podcast was about. Now, I'm just going to dive into the pros and cons of this, because maybe you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. There are pros to it, but there's also cons. So this gives you more time. This is the pro. It gives you more time to get it all together. So if you're like, I just can't do this. Like I'm just barely scraping by to get my audio file edited and completed and uploaded and all the things. I don't have time to create a blog post. Well, if you wanted to, you could release your podcast on a Tuesday, and then on Thursday, you wouldn't call it your show notes. This is actually a blog post. You could, totally up to you on whether you wanted to add the audio file. You could say, here's this blog post. This is an article, whatever you want to call it, and then insert or embed the audio file that goes along with it. So it is your podcast episode, but it is not your show notes, because you will not reference this in your actual episode. This is what I would recommend if you're going to do it this way. You can absolutely do it. You could do the blog post first and then have your podcast episode. But I would not reference this as your show notes, because it's not coming out on the same day. It goes back to what I said earlier. It's almost like I wouldn't be able to trust you if you said, go reference the show notes, but then I'm like, ooh, I really want to go see that. But then when I go to see it, there's nothing there. You guys, I'm not going to go hunting down content. When someone says it's supposed to be there and it's actually not, the credibility and the trust factor really starts to fall super fast whenever someone says, go look at this, go check this out, and it's the wrong URL or it's the wrong website. Maybe that's just me and I'm super harsh. I feel like my standards are pretty high when it comes to websites and content and where things need to be. So maybe this isn't everybody, but I wouldn't trust somebody who says, go look at these show notes, and then those show notes aren't there. So that is the main thing, is it gives you more time to get it all together. But the con for doing door number two, which is releasing an audio file and then a blog post, is you are probably going to confuse your audience if you are releasing this content that looks exactly identical, but it's at different times. So perfect reference is this episode today. So let's imagine you go to the show notes, right? We're pretending these are my actual show notes, right? crystalprofit.com/episode 165. This is what I'm talking about. But if I were actually to release the podcast, right, this audio file, wherever you're listening to this, and then later I released something that had the exact same title, was about the exact same topic, I would be confused. I would say, well, why didn't she just put this out on the same day? Is she lazy? Why didn't she go ahead and release this if she knew it would help me when I listen to the audio file? So I'm not saying that that's what people would think about you, but I can see where the confusion would come in from your audience, is like, wait, is this the same thing? Do I need to go read that too? Because I don't know that I have time to go read that as well. So that is the one con about releasing them at two separate times. I'm not saying it's not doable, but it may confuse your audience. So that's door number two, releasing the audio earlier in the week or your blog post or vice versa. However that works, just be aware that it could confuse your audience, but it would give you more time to get everything together. Okay, so that's door number 2. Door number 3. This is for you, especially if you are just getting started and you have no desire to do show notes whatsoever right now. Okay, this is your door. So you can release your audio file, door number 3, and then you can repurpose it for a blog or for other content in the future. So if you were going to go do a podcast episode that just had a very brief podcast description, if you're a Buzzsprout user, then that would be your podcast description, which is underneath your title. If that's the extent of show notes that you wanted to do, that's amazing. I think that that's a fantastic place to start. And then in the future, if you see one podcast episode is performing really, really well, then you can take that, transcribe that episode, and then turn it into a blog post 6 months from now or 2 months from now. This is actually something I've done multiple times with my podcast episodes that I've turned into YouTube videos. It's not the exact same content, and I didn't actually create the video file while I created the podcast episode, but it's something that it's a way for me to repurpose the content. In some episodes, I've taken like just one piece out of like a bigger, like if it was like 5 big points that I wanted to make in one episode, I'll just take one of those out and repurpose that. I've done the same thing for LinkedIn articles. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'll have a link to it in the show notes, but I've written a few articles that are just pieces of podcast episodes that I've done. And I've just gone in and taken parts of show notes. I don't do the whole thing because you can't write that much in an article as you could on a blog post, but I just take pieces of it and I say, ooh, I'm going to use that for LinkedIn. And then I've taken pieces of other podcast episodes and shared it out on social media. When I was like, man, I really don't have anything to say today on social, I'll go in and look at my top performing podcast episodes. I go in and I grab 3 or 4 points off of those and I say, oh, I'm just going to share that on social media. Done. So I've repurposed a piece of podcast content. So again, there's pros and cons to this as well. So the pro, and I think this is, like I said, super important if you're just getting started, it gives you more content to spread out over a longer period of time. So let's pretend that you recently launched your podcast, okay? In the last 6 months, you've launched your podcast and you are thinking, okay, I've gotten the hang of this. I know what I'm doing. I feel comfortable in my recording and my editing and interviewing. I think I want to branch into another content creation strategy. And you start thinking, I want to promote more on social media. Well, now you have 6 months worth of content, which could be, if you publish once a week, 24 plus ideas for your podcast episodes. You have those posts. You can go create social media posts. You could create blog posts. You could do like create blog post and then use that content and like just grab 1 point out of that and then post that on social media. There's so many different ways. And I need to do an episode on a repurposing strategy for content that you published a long time ago, because I think that that's really important and it's something that I'm actually been doing a lot of recently. But that is one of the biggest pros. So you get more content that you can spread out over a longer period of time. Now, the con is your audience just won't have show notes whenever an episode releases. So I say that this is a con only because door number 1 had like, oh, it's professional, it's legit. So if people are used to seeing other podcasts that have very detailed show notes, you may look like you're lacking a little bit. But this is just going to depend on your audience. Like, I feel like y'all, like as my audience, you have a higher standard for me because I'm a podcast coach. This is what I do. I should have amazing show notes because this is what I do. But your audience may have nothing to do with anything online and they don't even know the difference between any of it. So if that's the case, then this isn't a con. This isn't a bad thing for you. But if you are in a very competitive arena, like if you teach marketing, for example, if you have a marketing podcast, you better put every effort into standing out from your competition, because that is what is going to be the differentiating factor between someone listening to your show versus someone else's. And the reason why I bring up marketing is because that is a competitive category. Holy moly. Like, that has been one that's exploded over the last 12 months. I've seen more podcasts about marketing and different ways to grow your business than any other like category that's come across like my arena. But I think that that's because I'm kind of in marketing a little bit, but I just wanted to point that out. If you are trying to stand out in a very crowded category, a crowded market, then going all in with your show notes and really delivering something of value for your listeners every single week is going to help you differentiate yourself from your competition. But so that's why I just wanted to give you like the little take on if you could see that as a con or a pro. It's just going to depend on your show, your audience, your style, and the time that you have to do all of this. Because I know most of you, I would say 90% of people listening to this show, you're doing everything yourself. So I'm not sitting here assuming that you have a team of virtual assistants that you can just say, oh, this is the next greatest strategy. We're just going to throw everything out and I just have to show up and record and that's all I have to do. I had a really weird accent in there. I'm really not sure what that was. I recently changed Siri. Okay, we've gone on a lot of tangents today, so I'm just going to end with another little tangent that I think is hilarious and kind of ridiculous. Did you know that you can teach Siri, not teach her, you can download different voices. You can do a male or a female version, and you can do different dialects. My Siri is now Australian. Oh, I'm going to show you this. Hey Siri, what is today?
It's Wednesday, June 24th, 2020.
Do you love that? Yeah, that's her Australian accent. I love it so much. Okay, this total goofball moment. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we just did that. But we did. You know, we ended up on a very weird episode of going down memory lane, talking about Siri and dialects and Bob Barker and the Jetsons. And I don't even know what actually happened today. But I hope that you learned something about blog posts and episodes and show notes and all the things. You can definitely find everything at crystalprofit.com/episode 165. But again, I'm just going to reiterate one more time that all of this is going to depend on your style, your capacity, and what you are trying to accomplish with your podcast. So I'm going to say the door numbers one more time. So option number one, door number one, is to release both your audio and a blog post on the same day. Door number two is release the audio earlier in the week and then release the blog post later, or vice versa. And then option number three, door number three, is release the audio file and then repurpose it later for a blog or some other type of content in the future. So I hope that you found value in this. I'm just laughing because what a weird episode. But you know what? Here we are. We're just making the best out of the situation. Like, this is what you have, you guys. This is me. This is just who I am at my core, just a big goofball who loves to talk about podcasting. So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Check out the show notes. And if this is your first time tuning in, I hope that you come back. You've probably made a lot of snap judgments if this is the very first time you've ever listened to this podcast. But I'm so glad that you're here. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so you come back every single week and hear what other podcasting things that we have to talk about. And I would love it if you would subscribe and leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. And that's all I have for you today, guys. So remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of fan mail shout outs.